Greetings, everybody. I am not Corinne, but it gives me great pleasure to stand here and introduce my good friend, Corinne, as she shares with us this evening her experiences with writing this wonderful book, shares from this book, and also shares her thoughts about the Channel Islands. And it is a wonderful treasure we have right off the coast. And usually you look out here this time of year, not on a cloudy, rainy evening, but you look out over our beautiful golf course and you see the islands out there. They could not be more beautiful. I was out the other day and they're verdant. They're so green, it looks like Ireland. It's just magnificent. Decades ago when I first started visiting the Channel Islands, I don't know, maybe it was about the same time you started visiting, Corinne, but you'd step off your dinghy off the beach and you'd walk up in the hills, and everything was like a dirt road. Every place you stepped was just devoid of plants and just brown and dirt. And the plants that had taken literally millions of years to develop out there had been really wiped out by thousands of head of cattle and 10,000s of heads of sheep and countless numbers of feral pigs. The place was denuded. And the folks that you talk about in your book that went out there in the 1930s experienced that as well. It was a very different environment than it had been just as recently as 100 years before. Today, however, after only 40 years of conservation by the Nature Conservancy and by the National Park System, the islands are magnificent. Many of the species are coming. 150 endemic species you find nowhere else in the world. Many of them are coming back. Many of them are thriving, both on land and on sea. And it really is a testament to what is possible. We really do know how to do this stuff if we set our mind to it. And if we want to be involved in conservation, we can do a good job. One of the best interpreters of the many wonders of the Channel Islands and of their interpretation is our speaker tonight. Like the adventurers described so compellingly in her book, North American Galapagos, Corinne has visited all 8 Channel Islands, and as such is a member of the exclusive All 8 Club, which is sponsored by the Santa Cruz Island Foundation. I got to tell you that we're both members of that club, and we're both very proud of that fact. We're both advisors to the foundation, but truthfully, that's where our shared distinctions end. For not only has Corinne set foot on every island, she has studied every island. She had carefully and in depth. She's completed extensive research as a naturalist, as an archaeologist, and as a historian on land, and as an accomplished diver in the waters that surround these magnificent land masses. And she's written about all 8 Channel Islands in her captivating new book about the pre-World War II adventures and discoveries of the Channel Islands Biological Survey, sponsored by the LA County Museum in the 1930s. It's a terrific read. Mari got me a copy of the book at Tecolote when it first came out, and I've enjoyed every bit, every paragraph. Corinne, as a fellow of the Los Angeles County Natural History Museum, as past president of the American Cetacean Society, as a director of both the Aquarium of the Pacific and the Marine Conservation Institute, and as a member of the All 8 Club, Corinne is well known as a scholar and a writer, and as an accomplished expert. I know she's probably ashamed I'm saying these things, but it's true. I mean, she really is. She's a scholar's scholar. Read her book. I'm telling you, we are very fortunate to have her here with us this evening as she introduces the North America's Galapagos. Please welcome Corinne Laverty.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes this evening's Hank told you everything you need to know. No, thank you very much. That was a very warm welcome. I would like to, before beginning, I hope you just indulge me for a moment, but I am so grateful to all of you for being here, and for many of you for supporting me through over time as I've written this book and showing your interest. And I thank the House Committee and Gary and Nikki for inviting me to speak tonight, and I hope that you all will enjoy the stories that I'm going to try to share with you. Okay, So, now can you hear me okay? I'm not sure. Okay. All right. So, North America's Galapagos, the Historic Channel Islands Biological Survey. This book recounts the never-before-told story of a group of scientists and researchers who came together in the late 1930s to embark upon a series of expeditions, unprecedented expeditions to California's Channel Islands. The survey was undertaken under the aegis of the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, and the scientists' mission was to unravel the human history and biological evolution of California's 8 Channel Islands. So I know some of you have some familiarity with the islands and others have a little less, so I thought it would be good if we just sort of level set and get to know the islands together first before I go into the narrative of the book. All right, so here they are, California's 8 Channel Islands lying within the Southern California Bight like giant paint splatters on a Google Earth-sized Jackson Pollock canvas. They stretch from Point Conception to near San Diego. Now, they didn't always look like this. Millions of years ago, the rocks that would become the Channel Islands lay submerged on the seafloor near present-day San Diego. And then, through really complex geology, they rotated clockwise 180 degrees and moved 150 miles northward until they kind of looked like this. At one point also, the 4 northern islands, the ones that we know here off our coastline, were one island. It's a super island called Santa Rosa. And Santa Rosa was 76% larger than the combined land mass of the 4 northern islands today. And it also was much closer to shore. It was only about 5 miles. So this is Santa Rosa, this outline here, and then this was the mainland. Then so they rose up out of the ocean about 2 million years ago. Now, once the Ice Age ended, the water, the ocean sea level rose, and so the low-level lands were subsumed, and we got to this configuration that we have today. Now, the point that this little geology discussion I want you to get out of it is that these islands were never attached to any terra firma that could have pollinated them with plants or animals. So everything had to get out there and then evolve and figure out how to live on these islands. Now, a couple things I'd like to mention about the islands as well. We usually think of them as the northern group and the southern group. And the northern group, because it was once one island that was very close to the mainland, shares more species in common with the mainland and each other than do the southern islands, that were never attached to each other, were always far out to sea, and have always been very far from the mainland. So therefore, their species diversity is less, so they don't have as much, as much wildlife and as much plant life. Additionally, the 4 northern islands tend to have much more fresh water on them than do the southern islands. And in fact, Santa Barbara Island, 1 square mile Santa Barbara Island, has absolutely no fresh water on it at all. So everything that lives there relies solely on rainwater and fog for its sustenance. And then the last thing I just want to mention is that the 4 northern islands and Santa Barbara are part of Channel Islands National Park. So we can fairly easily get out there if you're willing to travel across some rough passages sometimes and some difficult island landings. But it is open; those are open to the public, as is obviously Santa Catalina. Okay, so with that as our starting point, let's take a look at some of these islands. These islands, let me tell you, these Channel Islands are wild. Harsh. Thrilling. And spoiled. Spoiled in terms of humankind's careless use of them through the introduction of exotic species such as horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, goats, rabbits, rats, cats, agricultural products. Now, those of you who know me, you'll know that I'll be the first to say that every island deserves a little wine, but perhaps we shouldn't be growing it on the islands. And incidentally introduce crops as well and plants as well. Yet, these islands remain resilient in their unruly ability to resist domestication, no matter how forcefully we've attempted to enslave them for uses such as ranch lands, big game hunting parks, recreational venues, movie sets. This is a remnant herd of some buffalo, maybe 10 buffalo that were brought over to Catalina in the late teens, early 20s, and then when the movie was over, it was too expensive to bring them back, so they just left them. And they grew into a herd of about 500 animal. And also bombing ranges. Now somebody remind me to come back to this slide at the end of the Q&A process. Still, despite these uses, 150 plants and animals either currently make or have made their home on the Channel Islands and nowhere else on the planet. Hence their nickname, North America's Galapagos. Now here's a couple animals that do live on the Channel Islands. We won't go through all of them in the interest of time, but I want to draw your attention to a few. First of all, we're going to talk about the Channel Islands fox in a little bit because he's just too darn cute not to talk about and look at pictures of. Secondly, you probably recognize this bird. This is the Santa Cruz Island scrub jay. It's a descendant of the scrub jay here on the mainland that we all are familiar with. It's 25% larger than the mainland jay, and it's much more brightly hued. Additionally, it's the Channel Islands' only endemic bird, and what that means is this bird lives nowhere else in the world. Unlike, bird like a seabird might fly over there and fly to the mainland. This guy doesn't go anywhere but Santa Cruz Island. And I asked an ornithologist the other day, why don't they just go to Santa Rosa? It's right next door. There's lots of good things in Santa Rosa. And she just shrugged her shoulders and said, I don't know. But it doesn't. It just lives on that one island. Now this fellow, he's kind of cute, I think. He is a Santa Catalina Island ornate shrew. And what I especially like about this creature is it was first collected and first described during the period that the Channel Islands Biological Survey was in full force. And it was described by Jack von Blocher Jr., who was the survey's mammologist and bat expert. And so he described it and wrote about it and discovered that it was a subspecies of the mainland shrew. And it was kind of a cute story of how he got his hands on this little critter. Now, this is an example of an extinct animal. This Colombian mammoth lived on the mainland. And he's between 20 and 40,000 years ago, and possibly as long as 200,000 years ago, they swam across the channel to inhabit Santa Rosa, the super island. And over time, their young evolved into this pygmy mammoth. So this guy's about 14 feet high. He's about 5'7", so he's about like a lot of our height. And the pygmy mammoth only lived on the Channel Islands. And the two of these guys did coexist on the Channel Islands, but the pygmy mammoth never went back to the mainland either. He lived only on the Channel Islands. But what I think is so fascinating about the pygmy mammoth is that it didn't just evolve to become smaller. It actually evolved to utilize a different ecological niche. So this fellow ate different foods than the Colombian mammoth, and its body changed, its skeletal and muscular structure changed so that it evolved to have what amounts to four-wheel drive ambulation abilities. It could get up really steep mountains, hillsides, island slopes that the Colombian mammoth could not reach. So it had access to a different food source and different, microenvironments. And also what that means is that it also had a braking function that let it go down those slopes. So pretty good. But that means that today scientists find Colombian mammoth bones only on the lower grassland areas of the Channel Islands, and of course on the mainland occasionally. But they find pygmy mammoth bones all over, so on high ridge lines or on hillsides, as well as the lower steppe tundra grassland areas. Okay, I promised I'd talk about the fox. This Channel Islands fox, lives on 6 of the islands. On each of the 6 islands it lives, it's a distinct subspecies. Only the 2 smallest islands, Santa Barbara and Anacapa, don't have their own species or subspecies of fox. It evolved from the mainland gray fox, which is an animal that's about 15 to 20 pounds in size, into this tiny little guy. He is about 6 pounds, the size of a house cat. It is the smallest canid in North America and among the smallest dogs in the world. And he has a fearless heart. If you go to Santa Cruz, I can almost guarantee you if you sit around a picnic bench, you're going to see this guy. He's just going to come right up in the middle of the day. However, and he is the top terrestrial predator on the Channel Islands. Pretty amazing. He's about this big. However, its status as the top terrestrial predator did nothing to save it from near extinction on every island that it inhabits in 1999. Now, to give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem, in 1994, on Santa Rosa Island alone, which is the one that's just to the right of Santa Cruz, it was estimated that there were 1,800 foxes. How many do you think were living in 1999 on Santa Rosa Island? Any guesses?
2.
2. Okay, that's really bad. But close. There were 15 foxes left. That's all. From 1,800 to 15 animals. And the conservation issues involved, first of all, in figuring out what happened. On every island, it was something a little different, and it was really complicated. It had to do with DDT and bald eagles and golden eagles coming over from the mainland and ungulates. And also, when we started a captive breeding program, they learned that these foxes can climb. So they climbed out of the cages until they put roofs on them, and it was crazy. But luckily for us, through a concerted effort of the U.S. government, the National Park Service, NGOs, the military, and private citizens, this fox has recovered on all 6 islands that it lives. And we hope, yeah. And they're being monitored now, so we hope that we never have this issue again. But what this story about this fox exemplifies is the fragility of island ecosystems. Islands evolved in isolation, and everything evolved to work together. And when we introduce plants or animals like the sheep that, ate everything on the islands till it was just dirt, we put in danger these unique ecosystems. So it really is incumbent on our stewardship to keep these islands as pristine as possible. Now, for the gardeners among you, I wanted to introduce just mention a couple plants that can only be found on the Channel Islands. This is a Santa Barbara island, Live Forever. It lives on that little 1 square mile of land, that speck of land out in the ocean, and only on Santa Barbara. And there's no fresh water, so it's a succulent. And on the other sides of the size spectrum, we have the Santa Rosa Island Torrey pine. This pine is related to the Torrey pine in San Diego. It's among the rarest pine trees in the world, and it's found only on Santa Rosa Island and only in 1 grove on that island. Now, it's really, if you're so inclined, the walk from Betcher's Bay, the pier, up this nice, gentle coastline to this grove of trees is really lovely. So if you are interested, springtime is a wonderful time to go out to the islands because they're green, and then you see birds nesting and things like that as well. Now, in addition to the endemic plants and animals, other species of animals rely on the Channel Islands for their species survival too, and seabirds are a really good example of that because seabirds are ground nesting birds. So they spend a lot of their time at sea, but then they have to come to land to nest. And so it's really important for them because they lay their eggs on the ground, they incubate their eggs on the ground, they hatch their young on the ground, they fledge them on the ground. If there are predators on these islands, it's terrible for the species. So you might guess that Santa Barbara Island and Anacapa Island, that never had any foxes on it, or rats or any of that kind of stuff, were critically important habitats for seabirds, and they still are. However, because of the rats and cats and rabbits, many species of seabirds were really endangered for a long time, and those numbers are only now coming back. But they are because we have, predator-free environments. We've taken off all the non-native animals from these islands. And actually, this is a picture of a brown pelican, a juvenile brown pelican, and it was taken on Santa Barbara Island. I guess he was on Santa Barbara Island. But they also, and so you can see these on Santa Barbara Island if you go there, but Anacapa has a huge rookery of California brown pelicans. Okay, archaeology is a really important part of the Channel Islands story, and my book deals a lot with it. In fact, the National Park Service deems the sites on the northern islands to be among the most important in North America, if not the world. And that same sentiment is echoed by a researcher, a well-known Channel Islands researcher from the Smithsonian, who states that these islands, archaeological record there plays a role in research issues and questions of global significance. So what are these questions of global significance? Well, one of them is the manner in which and the timing of which North America was first populated. All of us in this room grew up learning that the first Americans came across the Bering Land Bridge and walked into Canada through the ice-free corridor and then down into what is now Clovis, New Mexico, and then only eventually spread to the coastlines. And they did do that about 13,000 years ago. At least they got into Clovis, New Mexico about 13,000 years ago. But now, due to research that's happening all up and down the coast of North and South America, we are finding that people probably got to North America earlier than that, and they did it through a seafaring path. They used boats of some kind to go up the Bering, Siberia, and across to Alaska, and then down the coast of North America into the Channel Islands area, and eventually down into South America. And the Channel Islands play a really important role in this new theory. For instance, this is a picture of a shell midden on San Miguel Island. Now, a shell midden or a midden site is a place where native peoples would throw away the detritus of everyday life. So they would eat a mussel, they eat the meat, and then they'd throw away the shell in a pile. They would have a broken knife blade, and they would throw that in the pile because they didn't need it anymore. And so these middens provide really wonderful information for scientists and archaeologists to mine for how people lived, what kind of technologies they had, and so forth. On San Miguel Island, there is a rock shelter cave complex, which is also a shell midden, that has shown that people used that site for 12,000 years. So if they'd gotten to Clovis 13,000 years ago, it's pretty unlikely that within 1,000 years they would have gotten to California and then to San Miguel, which is one of the roughest passages in the continent, all in 1,000 years. Additionally, here, this is a picture of Santa Rosa Island, the northwest shore. And before I tell you why this is really important, let me just digress and let you know that this photograph was taken in December 1941 by a man named Jack Kofer, who's still alive. He was the youngest member of the Channel Islands Survey. He was 16 when he stepped foot on this island. His mother had to write him a permission slip so he could go and miss some school. And he did. But at any rate, this is, right here is Arlington Canyon. And if you've heard of that, you'll have heard of Arlington Man. Arlington Man was discovered in this canyon, and Arlington Man has been radiocarbon dated to 13,000 years of age. It is the oldest human remains ever found in North America. So we have the oldest human remains and the oldest shell middens, and we have a preponderance of old sites dating to 9,000 years plus of age. Now there would be more probably, but remember we had sea level rise. So all those sites are underwater now. And there is some research going on trying to find underwater archaeological sites. But scientists who espouse this theory think that North America was probably populated between 14,000 and 18,000 years ago, so much earlier than we had thought. Okay, so with that as a background, the scientists who participated in the survey and all the scientists around during the 1930s knew these islands were really special. There had been small scientific expeditions to them, but there had never been an all 8-island survey. Credit for coming up with that good idea belongs to this guy, Donald C. Meadows. Don Meadows, in 1939, when the survey was launched, was a 41-year-old high school biology teacher in Long Beach, California. A lepidopterist, which is a butterfly scientist, with a personal collection of 20,000 butterflies. And he was a very ambitious man, and he wanted to get a teaching job in higher education. So at the height of the Great Depression, he did something really gutsy. In 1930, he took a leave of absence from his nice, cushy teaching job to go to Berkeley and get his master's degree. And then he came back, and he was still teaching in the Long Beach school system, which is nothing wrong with that, but he wanted to go into higher education. So he decided that he was going to have to get his PhD, and then he came up with the idea. Nobody has ever studied all the butterflies and moths on all 8 Channel Islands. So he decided that's what he was going to do for his research project. But that was a pretty big undertaking. So he went to see this guy. This is John Adams Comstock. He was the director of science at the Natural History Museum of LA County and himself a lepidopterist. And he was also a really amazing, talented man. He had lots of skills. But he saw merit in Meadows' idea, although he actually saw it as something that could be much bigger. His vision for this survey was that it would be an 8-island survey, but it would include all of the sciences. So it would include geography, or geology, botany, herpetology, ornithology, mammalogy, the whole gamut. And that is what made this survey so special, the 8-island nature and the multidisciplinary approach. He also thought that the fieldwork portion should last for 5 years. And during that time, he expected his scientists to make collections. These are fox skins on the Santa Cruz Island. Then bring them back to the laboratory for study and examination. Following that, he wanted them to write peer-reviewed scholarly articles, and then articles for the popular press, and then finally to develop museum displays. So on Christmas Eve, 1938, he and Meadows presented to the Honorable Board of Governors, who is the governing body of the Natural History Museum, and who reported to the LA County supervisors this proposal. And again, this 8-island scope and this big approach was what set it apart from anything that it had ever come before. And in fact, it's never been replicated. So no one has ever tried to do this again. It was really complicated. I mean, it's a big project. And guess what? The Board of Governors approved it. But how in the heck did Comstock and Meadows get them to approve this when in Europe another world war was brewing? It was 1938, Christmas 1938. And it was still, the country was still under the effects of the Great Depression. And Los Angeles was suffering from police racketeering and political corruption. Well, Comstock did this by including a really shrewd provision. He told the Board of Governors that this 5-year survey would cost the museum no additional funds outside of the regular staff salaries of the museum scientists involved. That meant that Meadows and his Long Beach teacher friends could participate on the survey, but they wouldn't get paid. It also meant that the scientists had to bring all of their own personal camping gear, they had to pay for their own food, and hire their own camp cook, and find transportation across the channel and from island to island, all for free. Now, this proved to be the most vexing part of the equation because they had a lot of equipment and it's costly to get back and forth. But they did put together a patchwork of providers who did provide free transportation. But it was always a little bit of a problem. So in February 1939, they set out and they went to San Clemente Island first because San Clemente Island was a military base and they wanted to find out what was going on that military base. Now, I want to introduce you to 2 more characters. You've met Meadows and you met Comstock. This is Jack von Blocher. Jack, as I mentioned, was the guy who found the shrew, who described the shrew. He was really a bat guy. He loved bats. He had pet bats. He had collections of bats. He was batty. He was also driven. He was compulsive, and he was flawed. He described himself as having been born under an unlucky star, and he was my favorite character. Jack was a really good, like I said, a collector. So he loved being out in the field. He loved collections, and in fact, when he died, apparently cleaning out his house was a nightmare because he collected everything from swizzle sticks to matches, But he did collect a lot. He was also pretty good in the lab. So he was good about bringing his finds back, taxiderming and analyzing them, and then writing about them as well. And he was really interested in returning the Channel Islands to their pristine state. So he had a very strong letter writing campaign with the National Park Service, urging them to exterminate the rats and cats and rabbits on Anacapa and Santa Barbara Islands because already those islands were suffering from these non-native animals. And here you see him. He's actually on San Clemente Island here. These are foxes, San Clemente Island foxes, and this is a cat, a feral cat. So he would catch these cats and use them as bait. Now, I love cats, but they really are bad for birds and reptiles, and we've just had some recent articles, I don't know if any of you read that, but the worldwide population of birds is really suffering because of house cats. Now, Jack was also very driven, and he had a master's degree from Berkeley. He studied under Joseph Grinnell. Grinnell is a really famous California naturalist who founded the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology in Berkeley. And Grinnell actually urged von Blocher to finish his studies on the land mammals of the Southern California islands and to pursue his PhD. So for the next quarter century, that's what this man did, is he worked to get that PhD and to write his seminal work. Okay, Art Woodward. He was the director of archaeology and history, and he left a really great set of field notes that really helped me when I wrote the book. He left a lot of detailed notes. He also went to Berkeley, but he couldn't have been more different than von Blocher and Meadows, as if we'd scripted him. He could care less about academia. He could care less about titles. He actually left Berkeley before he even got an undergraduate degree, and he never went back. He was sort of a rabble-rouser. He liked what he liked and let you know if he didn't. He liked to stir things up. But he was a pretty good scientist. He published quite a bit on trade goods in the mainland, although he did not publish much about his work on the Channel Islands, which was really a shame. He did have a lot of very specific research interests on the Channel Islands, and he is credited for bringing a new level of archaeological rigor to scientific archaeological excavations on the islands. One of his big research projects was he wanted to figure out which tribes lived on these islands. Was it the Tongva tribe of the LA Basin, or was it the Chumash tribe of the Santa Barbara region? So he was really interested in figuring that out. Now, I mentioned that they went to San Clemente Island first, and this was the first big find that they made, Big Dog Cave. And the way they found it was because von Blocher wanted to find bats. So he went to the Marines and he said, "Where's a bat cave?" And the Marines said, "Well, this looks like a bat cave. It looks like one to me." But when they went there, instead of finding a cave floor soft with guano and a ceiling squirming with warm-winged creatures hanging by their toes, they found this, the detritus of a Native American site. And it was a treasure trove. The survey went back to this island a total of 5 times. Woodward went frequently. He went on all those expeditions, and he thoroughly excavated this cave, brought a lot of the goods back to the museum. And it was really amazing because you can see here how it's sited right above the ocean. So what happened was salt spray went into the cave, and it preserved soft goods, or soft items that typically deteriorate. So they found mission cloth, blue and white woven mission cloth, yellow and white woven mission cloth. They found otter fur, they found leather, they found a piece of a leather shoe from Spain. They found a wooden boat prow with a piece of rope still in it. They found another piece of a boat with the tarring that helped keep it waterproofed. So all of those things were in this cave, and normally those organic things would deteriorate, so you wouldn't see that. So he really collected and made a good collection of items that let people know, or scientists know, how people lived on this island in the recent historic 500-year past. And it's a good thing, because today this cave is completely off limits to military and civilian personnel alike, because unexploded ordnances litter all the pathways to that cave. San Clemente Island is the Navy's only live ship-to-shore firing range, and from personal experience, I can tell you they use it. Okay, a couple other things that Woodward was interested in. He wanted to find the gravesite of the first European explorer to go onto the Channel Islands, and that was Juan Rodrigo Cabrillo. This is San Miguel Island. That's Prince Island right there, but this is San Miguel. And there's actually a grave marker for Cabrillo here. Legend had it that he was buried on San Miguel, but new scholarship says otherwise. So he didn't find that gravesite. Additionally, he was fascinated with the story of the lone woman of San Nicolas Island. Now, You might recognize the story from Island of the Blue Dolphins that Scott Odell wrote back in the 60s. It's a book that most California fourth graders have to read. And that is a fictionalized account of the lone woman's story. It is true that her people were taken off the island in 1835, and she lived there until 1853, basically by herself. But again, Scott Odell's book is fictionalized. Today, we have lots of new scholarship about her, finding all this really cool information. She probably had a child that was a boy who grew tall. And then when she came to Santa Barbara, she mined this about the boy. And scientists think that maybe he had a boating accident and was killed by a shark. And then she really was alone. So there's all sorts of new information. Plus these drawings here, which I had all the drawings commissioned for this book, represent a time capsule, if you will, that was found recently on San Nicolas Island. And some of the items date back to between 1835 and 1853, that time period. So it could have been that she created these boxes full of 223 items that are really intricately made and stored. Really fascinating. But anyway, Woodward was really interested in her, and he was enamored with her. And so he wanted to retrace the sea captain's footsteps who rescued her, because, she came back. She lived there 18 years. She came to Santa Barbara. She died 7 weeks later. So rescued her is sort of a misnomer in a way. But anyway, he took the sea captain's memoir and he read it, and he made a photojournalistic story stopping at all the places that George Nidever, the person who came and got her off the island, went to. So here is the island caretaker, and they stopped at Abalone Springs, which is where Nidever stopped on the day that he found her. And Abalone Springs is a place named by the shepherds because it had really good water, and they left their abalone there to drink out of the spring. Then they went on to New Garden Springs, and Reggie Lambert, the caretaker, watered the horses. But this is where Nidever said Juana Maria left her cache of seal meat and blubber stuffed into the crevices of this spring to keep them cool, and also out of reach of her dogs. Because remember, she had dogs on this island. And these dogs were her pets. She had trained these dogs. One of my favorite stories about her is, because I love dogs, is that when George Nidever found her, she was on the beach cleaning a seal skin, scraping it clean. And the dogs were all about, and they got really, irritated when all these sailors started advancing. They started barking, and with one word, she silenced those hounds. Those dogs were pets. Finally, Woodward thought he found Juana Maria's whalebone hut. And right here in the foreground are 19 whalebones that he believed was her hut site. And he so believed this that the next year he went back to this island and he put the hut together, and he finished his photo documentary. He put a little dark-haired young female archaeologist inside of the hut, and he photographed her from the back. He took her fresh footprints in the sand, just like Nidever had found. But so he really loved this. And we're finding, scholarship now says this wasn't her hut site. There's other places that she probably did live, though. All right, every story needs a villain, and ours had one in the unlikely personage of the museum director. Roland J. McKinney was an art director, and he came from the Baltimore Art Museum right after the survey was started. And he wanted to dismantle the departments of history and science, and he created a lot of problems for Comstock and his men, and he demoted people, he fired people, and he was evil. All right, I'm going to wrap up pretty soon, but just real quick, a little bit about the composition of the survey. There were 33 men and women who participated. There were young people like Jack Cofer and his buddy Harry Fletcher, who were teenagers. There were citizen scientists, which was something new. That's kind of a new term. There was this gentleman, George Kanikoff. He was the museum's invertebrate specialist, and he was actually a Russian immigrant. He came to the States when he was 26 years old. And there were women. This is Ona van Bloker. She's Jack's wife, and she served as camp cook, unpaid. And she logged more time on the islands than a lot of the researchers did. Additionally, this woman is really important. Her name is Marion Hollenbach, and Marion and one other woman, Barbara Loomis, who participated in the survey, were likely the first two trained female archaeologists to ever go on the Channel Islands and do work there. So a pretty diverse group, especially for the time. Okay, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The scientists had two encampments. They were here at Betcher's Bay, and the boys, the kids, were out here at Tuckalota Canyon. See, right next to Arlington Canyon, so you can see why Jack might have taken that photo. At any rate, the boys were excavating mammoth bones, and this is in a very steep hillside here. These are jaw bones, actually. When the cowboys rode up and said, Pearl Harbor's been bombed, the West Coast is completely blacked out, ship traffic has been halted, we're not allowed to use our radio, we can't have any radio communication, we have no idea how you guys are going to get off this island or when, but you better pack up and go back to the rest of, to the other side of the island and be with the rest of your crew. They didn't know when they were going to get off the island, but leave it to John Adams Comstock to commandeer this boat. This is the schooner Santa Cruz. It is a cattle boat. This is how they transported cattle back and forth. And he got this boat to come get our scientists one day later than originally planned. And he brought them back to the mainland, and that effectively was the end of the Channel Islands Biological Survey. It was cut short by war. They did go to all 8 islands. There were 13 expeditions, and at least 49 scholarly articles were published. So that's it. Thank you. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, so Rocky just asked me to bring back this photo. Does anybody have an idea, except for Hank and Rocky, of and Peter, what this might be?
Military base.
Military?
San Clemente.
You can't tell me either. You know.
I don't.
You don't? Okay, what's your idea?
I think it's one of the fake Middle Eastern villages that this Navy SEALs built in order to invade and practice.
That's a pretty good guess. This actually, you're right, really. This is a replica of Osama bin Laden's encampment that was built on San Clemente Island for the Navy SEALs to practice their mission to capture the Al-Qaeda leader. I got to walk through this, and I snapped this with my iPhone. I don't even know if I'm supposed to have that picture. Well, they didn't stop me. A military guy took me around, so he didn't say I couldn't take it, but anyway, there are, walls that are knocked in, there were refrigerators in the way, all the windows have been blown out. It was really used. Anyway, thank you, Rocky. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Can you tell the story of the cover of the book?
Oh, the cover of my book. Let's see. Oh, I should tell you all about this too, so I'll come back. This, I think it's beautiful. This is a watercolor. And I decided to do maps for the book. And so I hired a map maker, and then I needed to hire an artist because I wanted every map to have some indigenous or endemic plants or animals on it. And I didn't know how to hire an artist. And so, I'm talking with my family, my kids, and my daughter says, "Oh, Mom, you should hire my college roommate. My daughter was living in New York. She said, my college roommate was really a good artist. And I thought, yeah, every college kid can draw. And then my son decides to go, he's driving up to Tacoma, Washington to go to college, and he likes whales, so he stopped in Monterey Bay to go whale watching, and he went camping. And he went on a boat, and he met the deckhand. And the deckhand and him start talking, and, oh, where did you go to college? Where did you go to college? And the deckhand said, I went to Eckerd College in Florida. It's 1,800 kids, which is the same place my daughter went. And so my son goes, oh my gosh, my daughter went there. When did you graduate? Who's her name? I know Marlena. And that's what the deckhand said. Oh yeah, and she was my girlfriend's roommate in college, so Cyprus. And I do maps and calligraphy, and Cyprus does art, and Cyprus. And still I thought, no. Well, it turns out that Cyprus was either going to get her PhD in biology, so I knew she'd get it when I said these things have to live on those islands, or her technical illustration master's degree. And I went, okay, you're on. But let me tell you about this. This is the Kaliesha Forest that you'll find on San Miguel Island. These are ancient root casts of bishop pines and other large trees that once lived during the Ice Age on San Miguel Island. And what happened was it was a really heavily forested island, and these trees liked cold weather. And when the ice age warmed, when the ice age ended and the world warmed, the trees died out. And so the tops of them all disappeared. But the bottom, the root structures were still there. And these shells mixed with rainwater leached into the soil and formed a sort of a natural cement, Kaliesha or calciment. I'm not going to say that word right, but you get it. And it formed around the roots. And then because over time the winds blew so heavily, it blew all the sand away till these roots were left standing. That's kind of cool. Okay, yeah?
I just have a question. You mentioned that the most treacherous route was to San Miguel Island. Why was that?
I said it was one of the most treacherous. And it's just the currents, because San Miguel is the most northern. So you have Point Conception. So you have these currents rushing down from Point Conception, the Northern California, Alaskan currents. And you have there's a sort of a countercurrent swell in the bight. I bet Hank could probably explain it better. But the currents are really wild around the Channel Islands. In fact, I think there's like 157 shipwrecks around the Channel Islands. And also, Anacapa Island has a light, and it was the last light built in California. And this is the oldest wooden structure in Santa Barbara County. That's on Santa Rosa Island. This lighthouse was built in, I think, 1932 was the last lighthouse built in California. And you can see how difficult it probably was to build it. Today, if you want to go visit Anacapa, it's the closest island. I really encourage you, especially in spring, the western gulls are sitting on the ground and they're nesting, and they're all facing the same direction. It's really weird. But anyway, to get to this island, the boat never docks. It just the swells kind of come in and out, and when the swell is out, the boat kind of hits the dock, and you have to jump up onto the dock. And then you and your gear have to walk up 157 steps to get to the top of the island. It's a tiny island. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you for tonight. You had mentioned it took 10 years to write this book. What was the spark that started this whole process for you?
Oh, well, I had another idea. And I went to the Natural History Museum and I sort of pitched it. And the archivist there said, you should write this story. And she pushed these two dusty boxes labeled 1939 to 1941 Channel Islands Biological Survey at me, and said, it's never been written about and it's important. And I thought it sounded really boring. But I started going through the archives, and there was yellowed paper, handwritten letters, newspaper accounts, memos, progress reports, pictures of children that lived on the island, stories of families, ranching, all this stuff. And I just fell in love with the people and the islands right then and there, so that's what got me started. So, well, thank you all very much for your patience, and I'm sure we'll have a really nice dinner.